In this video, I'm going to show you how I set up and use the amazing Sony A7R IV to do what I like to do, which is to shoot wildlife, specifically fast-moving birds. This is not a complete guide by any means. I don't cover video. I cover photography and setting up the camera in a way that works for me. Sony makes cameras highly customizable. You can set them up to do whatever you want photography related. So this setup might not work for you. It might not be the best setup, it might not be the worst, but this is what has worked good for me, so your results may vary. And this entire setup guide is also available as an ebook, a PDF. There'll be a link in the description below. It's for purchase, and it's a way that you can help support me and what I do with these videos, and you can have the information at hand at all times. And because the A7R IV allows you to load specific settings into the camera, in the guide, I will also have a separate file that has all of my settings on that file, so you can instantly kind of preload the A7R IV and have it set up exactly how I like to use it. I don't suggest that you actually do that. I suggest that you go through the setup guide just to familiarize yourself with the camera. The A7R IV is a high-res camera coming in at 61 megapixels. That means that the resolution is going to be there. You'll be able to crop in and see stuff that you've never been able to see before. If you compare it with a prime lens like the 600 f4 or any of the other Sony prime lenses, it's a whole new level of photography. It's absolutely amazing. And I think everybody is aware of the increase in resolution and the benefits that it will bring you. But there's kind of a flip side to this too. That high resolution will also expose all kinds of flaws in your technique, in your settings, in your glass, and all kinds of stuff. So if your shutter speed is not correct, you're going to really notice it. If your aperture was set inappropriately and you don't have the right depth of field, you're really going to notice it. Higher ISO shooting, because the detail is so, it just is so impressive, you're going to see noise more in this camera than you would say like on the A9. Just something to think about. Don't let any of that discourage you, because when you get good with this camera and you start getting good results, it's absolutely phenomenal. And in my opinion, I think it's the best camera on the market as of this date. It's simply amazing. You can also use all of these things that it's telling you, like that maybe your shutter speed was incorrect or your aperture was set inappropriately, the depth of field was off. You can use all of that as a learning tool to make yourself a better photographer. So this camera is kind of brutal in its honesty when you make a mistake, but you can use those mistakes to learn from and become a better photographer. Before we jump into the digital realm on this camera, let's go ahead and take a look at the actual manual or mechanical controls. And if you're going to be shooting at fast shutter speeds with big lenses like this one, I actually suggest you turn the optical steady shot off. I've had good results with it off at fast shutter speeds like 1/2000th of a second or faster. If you do want to keep it on, I've had the best luck with the A7R IV in mode 2. So if you're going to keep it on, I would shoot it on mode 2, but if you're doing fast shutter speeds, I would suggest you actually turn it off. And let's go ahead and take a look at the actual dials and buttons and stuff that's on this camera. It's important to note that on the earlier model cameras, the A9 and the A9 II, there was a dial here that did a lot of functions. That's been completely removed because all of those functions can actually be accessed inside the camera, which is actually pretty cool. So they've removed some stuff, and we'll do that a little bit later in the camera. But let's go ahead and go over these buttons here. I'm going to start really basic stuff. You have the on and off button here, which is a rocker to turn the camera on and off. And this is important. This is the actual shutter release, and it has two functions in this camera. It's actually going to do two things for you. It will release the shutter, or open and close the shutter, which allows you to take a picture, and it will also activate autofocus. That's by default, but by the time we're done with this button on the top, the shutter button, is only going to open and close the shutter. It will no longer autofocus. And don't worry, we're not turning off the autofocus because we need it. We're going to actually be using a couple buttons on the back to do different types of autofocus. It's a method called back button focus, because you want to be able to have control over when the camera focuses and when it doesn't at all times. There might be times when you don't want the camera to try to initiate focus. And a good example of that would be, say you have a bird that's perched and beautiful light up on a branch, and you initially focus on the bird's eye. You got a good focus and you're firing off some shots, but then the bird like does some kind of crazy shake. And when the wing comes up like this, if you were still initiating autofocus, the autofocus might shift to the wingtip and you would lose focus on the eye. So with this back button method, we can acquire focus one time on the bird's eye, let go of our focus mechanism, and then fire away. And the bird will always be in focus on the eye, as long as your settings are right, your shutter speed and your aperture, and your subject isn't moving forwards or backwards, and you're not moving forwards or backwards. So that's what we're gonna be setting this camera up for, and it's really powerful, really cool. Let's take a look at some of the other controls over here on the right side. You've got a dial right here on the front, and then you've got this dial right here on the back. Now the cool thing about the Sony cameras is you can switch these dials around to do different things. So if you want shutter speed here, you can put your shutter speed here, but if you would prefer the front be your shutter speed, you can put the shutter speed on the front and the aperture on the back. They give you the ability to customize these dials and swap them back and forth to do whatever you want. We've also got these two C1 and C2 buttons. We'll be setting them to do specific functions a little bit later in the video. And then you've got the main control wheel. And this control wheel has a locking mechanism right here. The only way you can turn it is you have to push this button in, and then you can rotate the dial in the direction that you want it to go. I generally almost always shoot manual. I don't shoot shutter, aperture, or program. I don't shoot auto. I might use S&Q, which is Sony's slow-mo video, and then I love to shoot video with these cameras, which is this one. I don't use the user programmable settings of 1, 2, or 3. I just don't really have a need for them, but you can do different things on these to where basically you have a completely different camera in bank 1, 2, or 3. Just not for me. By the time I'm done setting this up, I can do everything I want without really taking my eye from the viewfinder by just moving a button or two. The other thing that's important to note on here is the exposure compensation dial right here. And they've done something new on the A7R4 with this. They give it a lock. One of the big complaints of, say, the original A9, this had no lock, and you could hit this in the middle of shooting and with your leg, your arm, whatever. Now they've given it a lock, so you can't accidentally jar it out of place. So you can set it, lock it, unlock it, do whatever you want. And I use exposure compensation quite a bit, and I'll explain that a little bit later. And on the back, we've got other buttons as well. We've got the menu button, we've got the C3, which we'll use customized. This little button will record your movies. And of course, we've got the big AF on button, which is nice. They made it bigger on this camera. We've got this AEL button, which we'll be setting up custom. We've got this little joystick, and it's actually really cool because it's not really intrusive and it's very easy to move. I'll show you what we can use that for. And it's also, if you press the center, press it in, it's actually a button click too. You've got this FN, you've got these other buttons here. Now this button, or this dial, is extremely important in the Sony camera system because it does a lot of stuff. It can be turned, clockwise or counterclockwise to do stuff. The center button here will act as your enter button when you're making menu selections, and we'll go over all of that. And this button is also broken down into 4 pieces. You have like a north, a south, an east, and a west, and we'll be assigning functions to each of those buttons too. All right, let's take a look at where the memory cards go in this camera. They go in this little door right here, and you just pull the door forward and let it go, and it pops open. And there's 2 slots. There's a big deal about that with some other cameras on the market, but this has 2 slots, and they're both rated for fast cards. And I personally like the Sony Tough cards. They're supposedly dust proof, moisture, waterproof, all that good stuff, and they're fast at 299 megabytes and 300 megabytes read and write speed. And it's important to note too, to have the fast cards, it has supposed to have 2 rows of teeth. That's one way that you know that you have a fast card. And the cards go in this way with the teeth facing out, and they just pop in and lock in place like that.
You're gonna need some space with that 61 megapixel camera, and the 128 gig card here, the G one at B&H, is $189, but the M version is only $60. But it comes with a limitation. It's got half the write speed. It's only a write speed of 150 megabits or megabytes per second, whereas the G card is almost double that at $299. So $189 or $60. You make the choice.
It's totally optional, but I highly suggest the vertical grip on the A7R4. It seems to improve the overall ergonomics and balance of the camera. Plus, it gives you the ability to carry 2 batteries at once, which is really awesome. First battery runs out or depletes, it automatically switches to the second battery. You could just carry extra batteries in your pocket or your bag, but if you're in a really tense shooting situation and your battery dies, the time that you have to move or replace that battery is going to seem like an eternity and you're going to lose some shots. It's happened to me. So I always keep the grip on my camera. There's another really cool feature too. It allows you to shoot the camera vertically and still have it very ergonomic. You have all of your buttons mirrored on the actual grip for vertical shooting. You got both the front and rear dial, the C1 and C2 buttons, and you've got the actual shutter release so you can take pictures. There's this lock function which allows you to actually lock the grip, and when the grip is locked, none of these buttons work. So when you're shooting regularly, you can lock it so you don't accidentally hit these buttons, and then when you go to shoot vertical, you can quickly turn the rocker and unlock it. And you also have these other buttons mirrored on the back as well. The AF on button, the AEL button, and the joystick with its clickable center button as well. Again, it's just completely optional, but I feel that it makes the camera a little bit easier to hold, a little bit more balanced, and I get to carry 2 batteries at the same time. But if you have really small hands and you like the small size and lightweight body, then remember this grip adds extra weight and you're carrying 2 batteries at once. So it might not be exactly what you want, but for me, I find it extremely handy and I highly suggest it. One of the cool things about the Sony mirrorless cameras is the camera's ability to automatically switch from this rear screen to the EVF. So when you get close, this rear screen shuts off. So what's actually happening there is as you approach the camera, it switches from the rear screen to the electronic viewfinder. And it's important to know how this is happening. Under this little rubber eyepiece, there's a sensor that's making all of that happen. And I'm going to show you how to get to that sensor because you might need to a little bit later. To remove this rubber eyepiece, there's a couple of little tabs here. These little tabs go out, so you can press them out with your thumb, and then this whole eyepiece slides up, and you get access to this little black rectangular sensor. And the reason I'm showing you this is because I've been out with a lot of people, myself included, when this sensor gets a little bit of dust on it or sweat or moisture, it might stop functioning. So if you pop this off, you clean off this little sensor, you get everything back to the way it was. And this eyepiece slides back on and then clicks. Another interesting thing to note is this sensor will always shut off this rear screen. So if you're trying to show somebody something on the rear screen, like some pictures, every time you get over here, it shuts the screen off and it becomes kind of a nuisance. But a friend of mine, Michael, actually showed me a way to fix that. All you have to do is pop out this rear screen just a little bit and it deactivates that sensor. So then the rear screen is always on. It's actually a really cool little feature. All you gotta do is pop that screen out, put it back, and then the sensor is back on. By the time we're done setting this camera up though, it's gonna perform a little bit different. All that stuff will be the same, but this rear screen will be set to a mode to where it's off almost all of the time, like right now. And I'll show you how to do that a little bit later and explain why you wanna do this as well. There's a lot of talk on the internet about the Sony menu system being challenging or difficult. It's actually not really challenging or difficult at all. There's just a lot of stuff that you can do. I'm going to explain the easiest way to navigate the menu system. It's pretty simple. The top section here, you have these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 settings. You have the camera, camera 2, the little globe, the play button, the toolbox, and the star button. Think of these as your main categories, and everything underneath there lives within this main category. So right now I'm in category 1, and these are all the options for category 1. If I wanted to move to category 2, notice how nothing down here is highlighted. Look, this is highlighted now, so I'm now out of this top menu and I can navigate back and forth this way. So if I wanted to navigate just the top menu really quick, you can come up like this and then just use this wheel or this joystick to bounce between all of these top menus and then come down to make your changes within that top menu. There's also a shortcut key within the menu system to bounce between all of these top pieces. Even if you're down here, if you press the FN button, it will jog to the next main menu. So you can use the FN button really, really fast to bounce between the main menus back and forth. Always that FN button. People always complain about the FN button. Sorry, that's a dumb pun, but hey, it's there. So the other important thing to note is when you're actually in the menu system, whatever is highlighted in orange is where you're going to be able to make your changes. And you also have pages. That's how Sony does the menu system. So this is page 1 of 15 within this camera section. And it's also important to note that down here you have the back arrow. So if you want to get out of the menu at any time, you just press the menu button and you're back out. Another cool way to, like if you're in a panic and you want to get out of the menu system, you just half press the shutter button and then boom, it dumps you out of the menu system. Another interesting thing to note, if you ever have any questions about what you're doing in the menu system, so we'll come down here to this raw file type compressed. It says a garbage can ? So the garbage can is actually the help system. So if you hit the garbage can, it's going to give you more information on whatever you have selected. And then this center button I mentioned before, but this is always confirmation within the menu system. So if you wanted to say, well, what does aspect ratio mean? Well, let's see. If you hit the garbage button, it tells you, selects the aspect ratio for still images. And then this would confirm that. Okay. Pretty simple stuff. So with all that stuff out of the way, we can actually get in here and start setting this camera up. One other thing I'd like to mention is I'm gonna have some settings in my camera that are gonna be grayed out that will not be grayed out in yours because I've made some changes further along. I'll try to explain those as I go along. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pop the screen out so that that little sensor doesn't shut off and we can actually see what we're doing here. And I'm going to come in and press this menu button and then we're going to dive into the menu system. I'm going to start on the very first page, on page 1 of 15, and my file format, I have chosen RAW. You can choose RAW and JPEG, or just JPEG. I prefer RAW files. You have more power in post-processing. I've also chosen compressed files over uncompressed. That makes the file size a little bit smaller. I don't have any issues with the actual compressed files. The JPEG quality is irrelevant because I'm not shooting JPEG. The JPEG image size is irrelevant, again, because I'm not shooting JPEG. The aspect ratio I've left at the default 3:2. And this APS-C/Super 35 I have set to auto. So what that'll do is if you actually use a crop sensor lens that was designed for a crop sensor camera, this is a full frame camera, when you put the lens, that crop sensor lens on this body, it will automatically go into crop mode. So you want to keep that on auto. So let's go ahead and move to page 2 of 15 and see what we got next. So this is one of those grayed out areas, the long exposure noise reduction. I'm shooting in continuous burst. That has to be single shot for that to appear, so that's grayed out for me. Same with the high ISO noise reduction. And shooting RAW, there is no high ISO noise reduction. That's why it's grayed out for me, because I'm shooting RAW. If you were shooting JPEG, you would have the option for this. The color space, I just leave the default sRGB. Lens comp, I don't do anything here. I leave it all at the default settings. I'm gonna go to page 3. Here's where we get some important stuff, the drive mode. So the drive mode on this camera is how fast it actually shoots, or how many consecutive images it'll shoot as you're holding the shutter button down. I'm shooting this camera at its fastest, which is 10 frames per second. And what that looks like here, it'll say continuous shooting, but when you actually choose this, you get all of these different sub choices. You got your self timer modes, but again, I want to come up here to the continuous shooting, and if you move to the right or the left, you can actually change the frames per second from high to mid to low to high plus. High plus will give you that continuous 10 frames per second, which is really, really fast. And it's important to note, in my experience, the easiest way to shoot this camera is to not do long bursts. You want to do short, controlled bursts. I do maybe 5 to 15 pictures max, and then I might let off of the shutter button and start shooting again. But I think that's really important for a few reasons. The files are huge. You don't want to hit the buffer. If you hit the buffer, then you're going to run into problems. You won't be able to take very more pictures until the buffer clears. So try to remember short controlled bursts. That's also easier to keep your subject in the viewfinder when you're doing short controlled bursts. It's easier to track them on your own. Just kind of makes the whole process of using this camera easier, and I think it's really important to note. So I'm going to back up because I've got my setting all the way set up on the continuous high. I'm going to go down to the next setting, bracket settings. I'm not doing anything there because I'm not actually doing any bracketed shots. Intervals, I'm not doing any kind of time lapse or interval shooting, so that's all default. The pixel shift multi-shot, I'm not doing anything there either, so that's all off. The memory recall, that's grayed out. And then the memory here too, I'm not doing anything there either. So I'm gonna go ahead and move over to page 4 of 15, select media. This is where you can actually choose which slot you want to write or read from when you're looking actually to write to when you're shooting images. So you can choose slot 1 or slot 2 by default. It's on slot 1, that's what I'm gonna choose. Register a custom shoot set. That's really interesting. I'm not gonna go over that too much in this tutorial. All right, so let's jump into the next page. Page 5 of 15, and look at this. This is some really important stuff here. We're in the autofocus section of this camera. And the first thing that we're gonna look at is this focus mode of continuous AF. And we're gonna go in here, and if you look, there's all of these different focus modes. You have AFS, you have AFA, you have AFC, you have DMF and MF. For what we're doing with birds, we want it to be in AFC, or continuous focus at all times. It's really important. So make sure you have that set on AFC. And we're gonna come back in, and we have these next two options, which are priority set in AFS. Doesn't have anything to do with what we're doing because we're not shooting in AFS, we're shooting in AFC. So the priority set in AFC, if you dig into this menu, it's pretty interesting. These 3 selections, you're basically telling the camera how you want it to release the shutter or take a picture based on focus. So we have 3 options. We can release on autofocus, which means it will only take a picture if it thinks it's in focus. You can have it on release, and on release means it will fire a picture at all times, regardless of what the camera thinks the focus is. And then there's this balanced emphasis. And I suggest you use the balanced emphasis. I've had the best results with that, so I'm gonna suggest it's on balanced emphasis, and we're gonna keep it there. And then the next thing, it's gonna be interesting here, because when you come into this part, your camera is gonna look a lot different than mine. So when you come into the actual focus area, I've only got 3 focus areas selected. By default, the Sony cameras use about 14, if I remember correctly. But in my experience, and getting the best results on this camera, I only need 3. Your results might vary, and I highly suggest that you actually play around with all of the different focus areas to see what works best for you. But I'll explain to you why I've chosen these, when I use them, and all that stuff. And I actually give a live demonstration on a bird a little bit later, kind of showing you how it all works out. So my default one is zone. I'm gonna kind of back out of here, and we're gonna come back into the menu. The next focus settings, I don't do anything here, but this is really important. Focus area limit. So if we come in here and look at this menu, this is where you see all of the different focus areas Sony has given us. And they've given us a lot. They've given us, like I said, 14. And they're all a little bit different. They have different functions, and that's why I suggest that you actually play around with them and see what works best for you. But the ones that I like and I use most of the time, I use zone. That's a wider coverage area. I use this flexible spot small, which is a tiny little pinpoint or like a single point. And then I use this expand flexible spot, which is a smaller area in the middle, like maybe, I don't know, just it's smaller than zone. And I'll kind of demonstrate how I use all of that stuff a little bit later. But it's important to note that when you're in here and you're done doing all of these selections here, you need to come over and highlight OK, and then click this control wheel to confirm your selection. So let's go ahead and take a look at the back of the camera at what these different focus areas look like. And like I said, a little bit later towards the very end, when the camera's all set up, I'm gonna go outside and demonstrate how I would use all of these different focus areas. And I'm gonna use 3, and they're all set up on different buttons. And the really cool thing about it is the way it's set up. I can change my focus area without ever taking my eye off of the viewfinder. I just move my thumb over to the right or the left, or I use my index finger to push another button, and I've changed my focus area. It's very fast and it's very powerful. So by default, I'm using this focus area called zone. And if you look at the back of the screen here, somebody just messaged me. I gotta check that later. So if you look at the back of the screen here, you can see these 4 corners on the outside. Those 4 corners are actually representing the actual zone. So anything within this area here, the camera will try to automatically focus on. But there might be times when zone isn't what I want. And when that happens, I have this smaller one that you see blinking in the middle. I'm gonna set that to another button, and then I can use a 3rd one on top of that. But let me explain to you where I think zone actually might get you in trouble. So I use zone, I'd say probably 95% of the time I'm shooting birds in flight. It's awesome. I keep the bird in that zone and the camera knows to focus on them. Even if they're not moving, I mean a perched bird just sitting there not doing anything, and this camera's autofocus system knows that's what I need to focus on. But if that bird or that animal or whatever you're wanting to take a picture of is in some brush and there's something maybe in the foreground, then zone might focus on those items in the foreground. So zone is really good if your intended subject is somewhat clear of any obstruction. It rarely ever misses. But if there is an instance where there is something possibly in the way, like a rock or a stick, then we would use the smaller pinpoint one that I have in the middle, or even the tiny, tiny one that I'll have on another button as well, and I'll show you that a little bit later. Another instance where zone might not be optimal is on the water line. If the water is really rough and ripply, and say you're photographing an osprey, my favorite bird, the bird comes down in the water like this and a wave comes up in front of the osprey, zone is going to grab that wave in front of the osprey, but as soon as the wave subsides and the osprey is here again, zone will move back up to the bird. So you have to kind of be picky about when you want to use zone, but around 90-95% of the time it does the job that we need it to do. It focuses on fast moving subjects like birds in flight. All right, let's go ahead and go to the next page, which is going to be page 6 of 15. And we're going to have some more options here. The switch VH AF area, I have that on default of off. AF illuminator, I have that on the default of auto. Focus eye AF set, this is pretty interesting stuff. You're going to have to press the center button to go down deeper into this menu. You have all of these choices for the face eye priority and stuff like that. I keep everything on default. I haven't made too many changes here. One thing you're going to notice that's new in this line of Sony cameras and some updated firmwares is the ability for the camera to detect the human eye and automatically focus on it, or an animal. And you have a choice here. It says human. If you come over, you can choose animal. Look, they got this little cat icon. So I have mine set on human. And you might say, well, that's kind of strange. You're a wildlife/bird photographer. Why do you have it set on human? The animal eye autofocus works. It doesn't really work for the majority of the time for what I do for fast moving birds. I have had it work on owls, snakes, horses, cows, some birds that are perched, primates, stuff like that. But I also had one instance where the algorithm that tries to see and determine the animal's eye backfire on me. I was photographing a kingfisher in Costa Rica, and the kingfisher was on a stick eating a shrimp. It was maybe 3 feet in front of a rocky background, and the animal eye AF kept seeing an animal eye in that rocky background, and because of that, it was using that as priority, and it would only focus on the rocky background and not the actual bird itself. So I ended up losing a couple of shots of that until I turned it off and put it on human eye. And I'm going to actually set up a button that will allow you to toggle between human and animal really quick, which is how I do it now. So it's kind of important to note that. So I'm going to back up now that we've gone over all of those. Everything, like I said, is default. I haven't made any changes here. So I'm going to press the menu to back up. And this is very, very important. AF tracking sensitivity. I'm going to go ahead and show you. You have choices, 5 being responsive or fast, and 1 being slow or locked on. With the A7R4, I have had the best luck and the highest keeper rate by keeping this on responsive. And I'll try to explain to you what that means. So the AF tracking sensitivity being responsive, or our 5 fast, means that it will bounce quickly from one subject to another. And you might say to yourself, well, I don't want it to bounce quickly from one subject or the other. If that's the case, then you want to keep it on 1 locked on. But I found I had the best success with this by making it really fast and responsive. So if by chance my focus area grabbed a ripply water and it was on locked on and I was doing a burst, it would stay on that water the entire series of that burst. With it on responsive, it might grab the water 1 frame, but then 8 or 9 frames that come after that will all shift to the bird because I have it shifting really quickly. So I highly suggest that you keep it on 5 or responsive. Again, your results might vary, but that was a huge kind kind of tipping factor for me. As soon as I changed that, I started getting about a 99% keeper rate. Now this camera, it blows my mind. And again, it takes a little time getting used to how you should use this camera and all the other stuff that I've already mentioned. So I'm going to come back down here to aperture drive and AF. That's default setting. I haven't done anything there. The AF with shutter off, that's really important. You have a couple of options. You have it off or on. So this is where you actually disengage the shutter button from autofocus. As soon as you put that to what I have it set on, which is off, this shutter button will no longer focus. It will only open and close the shutter and take a picture. And that's what we want. But again, don't worry, oh my gosh, you've removed focus. We're gonna assign focus to some other buttons, which is a little bit more intuitive. Again, your results might vary. All right, so let's go to the next page, which is page 7 of 15, and we're still in the autofocus menu. The very first thing that you see here is the pre-AF off. I don't want the camera to pre-focus anywhere, so I've set that to off. The next option, the iStart AF, is grayed out. The AF area registration, you want that on, and it's really important. With AF area registration on, you're telling the camera that you want to use 2 focus areas at all times. And you can assign those 2 focus areas to different buttons. So you can go from a wide focus area of, say, zone, to a small pinpoint focus area of, say, expand flexible spot, just by moving your thumb from one side, from one button to the other. You never have to take your eye away from the viewfinder. It's really powerful, very helpful. I use that feature all the time. The next line is delete registered area AF. I'm not going to delete it because I like my registered focus area that I have. Focus frame color I have set to red. You can choose between red or white, and that is referring to the frame here that's in red. If you were to choose white, that same frame would be white. But like I said, I like it on red, so I'm going to leave it on red. The AF area auto clear is off. I'm going to go to the next page, which is page 8 of 15. The first item on the list I have set to on. Phase detect area I have set to off. I have this set to do not circulate. And then the AF micro adjust. I believe all of these are default settings, so I'm not going to make any changes there. All right, let's go ahead and go to the next page, which is page 9 of 15. And now we're seeing some exposure stuff. So exposure comp I have set default. The reset EV comp I have set default. ISO settings, I believe I have them set at default. I'll go over that a little bit later as I change some buttons around and control the ISO with a different button. The metering mode, I have it set to multi. If you go in here and look, you have a bunch of different metering modes. You have multi, you have center, you have spot, and you have different variations of spot. You have large, standard, and then you have entire screen average, and then you have highlight weighted metering. Sony's metering system is exceptional. It meters light very, very well, and I tend to use multi-metering more than anything else. I'd say 90% of the time that's what I use. So I'm going to back up. Face priority and multi-metering I have set to on. This is important. The spot metering point, I want it on focus point link instead of center in case I am doing spot metering. So with spot metering, you're telling the camera to measure the amount of light in the entire frame, but in one tiny spot, kind of pinpointing that light in one area, and the camera will tell you how to expose according to that light reading. When you put it on focus point link, it will link your focus point to the meter. So your spot meter will then become your focus point. So wherever you put your focus point in the frame is where the camera will meter the light for. Otherwise, it'll be in the center. But I want it on the focus point link so I can move my focus point around and actually measure the light in different areas of my frame. All right, we're going to move to the next page, which is page 10 of 15. And the very first thing on this list is exposure steps. I like to use steps of 1/3. Gives you a little bit more micro control over your overall exposure. The AEL with shutter, I never changed this, so auto is the default setting. The exposure STD adjustment, I haven't done anything there either. So I'm going to move to the next page, which is page 11 of 15. I don't work with flash at all, so we're going to skip right over that. If you work with flash, this is where you would change your flash settings, but I'm going to move on. This is some important stuff here. So now we're on page 12 of 15, color, white balance, image processing. White balance, I currently have it set on auto. I have no problems coming in here and changing this while I'm out shooting. I'm going to assign a button to it. make it really easy to switch the white balance in and out if I want to. And you have these options of actually adjusting the individual color on each actual white balance setting if you want. I keep it right at the middle. I don't do anything here at all. So I'm gonna go ahead and back up again. Priority set in auto white balance is standard. I just leave that. I think that's default. This DRO is like a HDR format. I don't use that at all. I've turned it off. This is kind of important, this creative style. If you come in here and look, there's all of these different styles. You have standard, you have vivid, you have neutral, you have clear, deep, and the list just keeps going on and on. I've chosen the creative style of vivid, and I've gone over here to the right and I've made a couple of adjustments here. Contrast is at 0, saturation, that's the overall color of the image, I have it at -1, and then sharpness, I have put it at +1. Now here's the kind of interesting thing about this. I'm shooting raw files, so this creative style of vivid with these settings I've just shown you has absolutely no impact on the raw file that I'm shooting at all whatsoever. So you're probably wondering why I would choose this. When you take an image with this camera and most digital cameras, it creates a JPEG preview inside the raw file. And when you're looking at all of the images through your viewfinder and on the back screen, you're looking at that JPEG preview. You're not actually seeing the raw file. So I like to add just a little bit of sharpness, a little bit more color with the vivid color to the JPEG preview that I'm looking at. So when I'm out in the field, I can take a burst of shots, I can quickly look at the back of the screen, I can look in the viewfinder, and it looks similar to how I might post-process my images. And I can tell, because I've added a little bit of sharpness to it, I can tell that the image is indeed sharp and it's a good keeper. I don't actually suggest that you delete images out in the field because you make mistakes. I've done it. I came up on a really rare heron one day, a Waterman's heron. They're a mix of birds. Took a shot and I looked at the back screen and I said, oh, I chose the exposure wrong, and I blew out the bird's head because the bird's head was all white, and I deleted the image, but it turns out the bird's head was all white because it was a rare bird, and I deleted it, and I've never seen another one since. So I don't suggest you do that out in the field unless you're really, really short on space. The one thing that I will note though about this, and it's very important to understand this, if you're shooting any kind of video with this camera, the A7R IV, this setting here of the creative style of vivid and all of the settings that you make, all of that is baked into the actual video that you are capturing. So you might want to change this before you start shooting some video. And if you come over here and crank the sharpness up really high, it's going to make your video really pixely and unusable. So just remember, this has no impact on the actual raw file, but it will bake these settings into any video that you're shooting. The picture effect I have off. Picture profile I have off as well. All right, let's go to page 13 and 15. Oh my gosh, look, it's huge. The shutter auto white balance lock. I want that on continuous shooting. I want it to lock the white balance, so the white balance will be same from frame to frame. Let's go to the next page, page 14 and 15. Focus assist. This is important, and we'll tie this in a little bit later, but I'm going to show you what I have on all of this stuff. The focus magnifier is grayed out. Focus magnifying time is no limit. Initial focus magnification is 1. AF and focus magnification is on. Manual focus assist is on. And peak setting. I'm going to come in here to this and make a change. I like the peak to be on. I like it to be a mid-level, and I like it to be blue. And what this does is when you are focusing on something, and you go to manual focus, it will highlight the entire plane of focus or the area that is in focus in a fancy little blue color. And I use that a lot for various reasons, but I like focus peaking on, and I'll give a demonstration of that a little bit later. I can't do it with this big lens right here because, well, there's just a wall there. It wouldn't work. So let's go to the next setting, which is the last one, page 15. Oh, yay, we did it. Anti-flicker shoot is off. Face registration, I haven't done anything there, and register faces priority is on. That's the default setting. All right, so we've made it through a big chunk of the menu. You should congratulate yourself. Go take a break, pause the video, come back, come watch it in another day. We're gonna jump into some other stuff here. So let's go. All right, so let's go over to number 2. And the first thing we're gonna see is a bunch of movie settings. And since this video tutorial doesn't cover movie settings, I'm going to go ahead and move over to page 5 of 11. So make sure you see that there, 5 of 11. All right, so the first thing on here is silent shooting. And I have silent shooting set to off, and let me explain why. You can shoot the A7R IV silently with an electronic shutter, so it makes absolutely no noise at all. It's kind of cool. But that electronic shutter does not work good enough for really fast moving subjects like hummingbirds or birds that are diving really quick. The readout from the sensor on the A7R IV just isn't fast enough to keep up with those fast moving birds. So I don't generally use silent shooting. I usually have silent shooting off because of that. And if you try to do it on fast moving stuff, you'll get rolling shutter artifacts and it's just weird. Pictures won't be any good. But later I'll set up a button to turn it on for maybe something that's not moving around so quick and I want it to be quiet, and I'll show you how to do that. So because of that, I'm gonna go ahead and put on the E front curtain shutter. That's gonna be on. And the next two items, release without lens and release without card, are set to disable. So what that's saying is release without lens, I want it disabled. I don't want the camera to actually release the shutter if there's no lens attached. I don't want it to try to take a picture. Same without card. I don't want it to try to take a picture if there's no card in the card slot. All right, and steady shot is actually off and it's grayed out because that's a selection that you actually make on the lens itself. The steady shot settings, they're all default. So I'm gonna go ahead and move to the next page, which is page 6 of 11. And look at that, it's all grayed out. This is a feature in the Sony cameras. It's actually pretty cool, but I'm not gonna go over it in this tutorial. So I'm gonna go ahead and move over to the next page, which is page 7 of 11. And here's where some interesting stuff comes into play. This disp button selection. If you select this, you get an option of two choices. You get monitor and finder. Monitor would refer to this rear screen and finder would refer to the actual EVF. So if you click on monitor, you get a list of things. All of these things are overlays which can appear on the actual monitor. And let me show you what I'm talking about. I'm gonna go ahead and go back to the monitor, and all the information that you see on the monitor are the things that I have selected there. So there's my histogram, there's my level, and then, oh, look at that, it shut off. This is a really cool feature. So I'm gonna go back in here to the monitor, and if you look, I've deselected graphic display, I've deselected display all info. I have one that says no display of info. That gives me just kind of a really clean screen. This would be my histogram, this would be my level, and then I have this selected for monitor off. And this is gonna save us a lot of important battery power when you have it selected to monitor off. All right, with those settings and the one about turning the monitor off, we can actually now turn off this rear screen almost so it's off almost all the time. So you remember how I showed you earlier, when you get close, it shuts off and it switches to the EVF. But with those selections that we just made, we can cycle through all of those selections and actually turn this monitor off. And to cycle through those settings, you just press up on this control wheel. So I'm gonna press up and it gives me the histogram, which was one of those choices. Press up one more time, I get the level, which was one of those choices. If I press up one more time, it shuts this monitor off. So right now, the camera, there's nothing on. There's no EVF on, there's no rear screen, so it's not really consuming a lot of power. And in my experience, when I set it up this way on a typical full day of shooting for me with this camera, I would burn through 2 batteries. When I switched to this setup, I'd only go through 1 battery in a day. So that's extremely powerful. And never fear, because you can turn this rear screen on just by pressing up again, and the rear screen is back on and it's back to the way it was. But let me show you something else that's really cool about this feature. So I'm gonna go ahead and cycle through these choices again. There's my histogram, my level, and now I've turned this off. So again, I'm in the power saving state where the rear screen is off and the EVF is off. Suppose I wanted to see an image. Typically you would press the play button to review your images, but the rear screen is off, right? If you press the play button, it automatically turns on the rear screen. Look, we got a loggerhead shrike there. Those are really cool birds, the butcher bird. If you wanted to shut this off, you press the play button again and look, it shuts it off. So we're back into that power saving state. If you wanted to see the menu for whatever reason, to make some changes on the rear screen, guess what? Press the menu button and the screen comes on and you have the menu. When you're done, you can press the menu button, or you can, in a state of panic, half press the shutter button and it shuts off the menu and the rear screen. Again, it's really super powerful. But we're not done here. Let me go ahead and activate the rear screen for you guys by pressing up. I'm gonna pull it out a little bit so it doesn't shut off. I'm gonna go ahead and go back into the menu because we still have another setting to go through here on this disk button. So when you come into the disk button, remember there were two choices. There was monitor and finder. We still need to come in here and check out this finder portion. So the finder refers to the EVF. So these are the options that I've chosen to display in my EVF. I want to display all info. I want no info, so I get a nice clean view in the display. I want to be able to see my histogram if I want to, and I want to be able to see the level. It's important though to note that when you make all of these changes, you have to move over to this enter selection, and then you confirm enter by pressing the center button, and then all of those changes are saved into that section of the menu. So I'm gonna go back into the menu, and I have the finder monitor set to auto. That's this switch that allows it to go from one to the other. I like it on auto. I've been told that the actual rear screen uses less energy than the EVF, so it's okay for the rear screen to be on as opposed to making it just in the EVF. So the finder frame rate I have set high. That refers to the viewfinder. I want a high frame rate in there so it looks as natural and real as possible. Zebra settings, I have everything default, and as you can see, it's actually off. Zebra settings are kind of an exposure guideline in camera that will show you what's over or underexposed, so I find them actually to be distracting, so I turn them off. Grid line, I have my rule of thirds grid that's overlaid in my on my EVF and on my rear screen at all times. The exposure set guide I have set to off, so I'm going to go ahead and go over to page 8 of 11. And live view display setting effect on. That's really important. You want that to be on. That will show you all of the live information in the viewfinder or on the rear screen. So you'll be able to see, for instance, your depth of field, your exposure. You'll be able to see where the camera is focusing. You get all this great feedback when you have that on. If you turn it off, it's kind of just blank. You don't really know what's going on. So I highly suggest that you keep that on. Continuous shooting length, again, this is just a personal preference. I don't want that displayed. I don't want the camera telling me that, hey, you've only got so many shots left. I have yet to hit the buffer on this camera, so I'm okay with that. And this is really important too. I have auto review set to off. I don't want the camera to automatically show me every picture that I've just taken. That's a waste of battery. Can kind of slow the process down. If I want to look at the picture, I'll look at it myself. I don't want the camera to actually do that for me. All right, we're gonna dive into the next page, page 9 of 11. Ooh, and this is where we get to customize some stuff. And the very first thing we're gonna do is this top custom key. And if you look, there's a bunch of different custom keys. So the top is customizing for when you're shooting images. The next would be customizing when you're shooting video. The next would be customizing when you're actually playing back video or images in the camera. So the first one that we're gonna do is we're gonna go into the custom key, and we're gonna make one change really, really quick. I'm gonna go ahead and go, let's see, I'm gonna go to a couple pages over. So actually, let me back up since I've got all this on here. You can see you get this nice graphical display, and then it kind of tells you what each one of the buttons is. So you have kind of a map of what's happening at all times, and that's really cool to have. But the first thing we wanna do is I'm gonna move over to these top buttons, C1 and C2, and I wanna set C2, which is this top button right here. I'm gonna set that to switch my focus area, and I'll show you why in just a second. So I'm gonna go ahead and pretend that we haven't done that yet so you can see where that is and how to do that. I'm gonna select it with the center button, and you're gonna see, look, there's actually 27 pages of customizing that you can do here. So this option is on page 4 of 27 in AF1, and it just simply says switch focus area. You want that highlighted, and you want to hit enter. Now let me show you what this does. This is really cool. So now that this is set up, I can cycle through all of my available focus areas just by pressing the C2 button, and it'll go through all of them. And that's important. I'll explain that later in how I shoot and why I shoot and the way I have that all set up. So that's really important. We need to have that before we can move on to the next step. All right, so in this next step, we're actually gonna unlock a little bit of really cool power in this camera. we're gonna set up our second focus area, or what Sony refers to as a registered focus area. I talked about that earlier, and the reason why I waited so long to do that is because I need to be able to cycle through my focus areas to get to the ones I want to set my secondary focus area. So I had to assign that C2 button to do that. So I'm gonna back out of the menu system, and I'm gonna choose what I want my secondary focus area to be, and I'm gonna cycle through them all with the C2 button. And I want expand flexible spot, and I want it in the middle. And I've already done it, so that's what this blinking one is here in the middle. That's telling you that's where your registered focus area is, but for you, you won't see that. So you're gonna want to pick whatever you want your second one to be, put it where you want, and here's the fun part. You're gonna hold in this FN button until it says registered the focus area. So just like this, you hold it in, there you go, registered the focus area. So now you have a secondary focus area that you can use, and we're gonna assign that now in the custom buttons along with the other custom buttons. So we've got that sitting there waiting for us to assign a custom button to it. Let's go assign some more custom buttons along with that function. All right, let's get back into this customizing, and I'm gonna take number one, which is the actual control wheel here, and I'm gonna click on that, and I've assigned my ISO to that. So that's page 2 of 5 under exposure. And let me show you how that works. It's actually really cool. So I'm gonna back out of the menu, and to do that, I'm just gonna half press the shutter button, and we're gonna kind of look at this rear screen. So right now, if you look in the bottom right corner, you see how the camera is displaying ISO auto? Well, the camera's set to auto ISO. If I want to go to manual ISO, all I have to do is rotate this control wheel clockwise or to the right, one click. Now I'm in manual ISO, and it's ISO 50, and notice how the screen went black. That's one of the cool things about mirrorless. You have a live reference to your exposure at all times. So if I want to raise my ISO to bring the exposure up, I just turn this wheel to the right or clockwise, boom, and then I've got my exposure correct. And so it's really powerful if you want to move from auto ISO to manual ISO. All you have to do is turn that dial to the right, and you're in manual ISO. Say your shutter speed and aperture are kind of anchored into a position that you want or a setting that you want, but the auto ISO is giving you trouble because maybe you have really contrasty subjects and backgrounds, which is where auto ISO will give you trouble, and you want to go to manual ISO. All you have to do is turn that dial to the right one time, and you're in manual ISO, and then you can turn it to get your ISO to where you want, and you get to see the exposure live as you're doing that. It's really powerful. And then if you wanted to go back to auto ISO, you just crank it counterclockwise all the way back. Really cool stuff. All right, so we're gonna go into the next one, which is number 2, which references actually this AEL button in the top right corner here. So that's where we're gonna recall our registered or secondary focus area. But we want to make a very specific selection. So I'm gonna show you where that is. I'm gonna go ahead and click enter. You want to be in AF2, page 5 of 27, and you look, you got all kinds of registered area stuff. But what we want is registered area or AF area plus AF on. So that's telling the camera to recall that secondary focus area, which we chose, I think it was expand flexible spot, and use autofocus on at the same exact time. It's really, really powerful. So once we have that set up, which I'm doing right now, it's on number 2. I'll show you the benefit of that. We'll say that like my main shooting, it will be zone, and say I wanted to move to a smaller, more pinpoint one. I can keep my thumb on the AF on button, which is going to activate zone, but just move it over to the right to the AEL button, which will activate just the center or the secondary focus area, which I have here. If I want to go back to zone, I hold in the big AF on button and it activates zone. So I never have to take my eye from the viewfinder to change from a wide focus area to a small. I just move my thumb from the right to the left. It's awesome, and it's a really quick way to get more of a pinpoint focus. The next one on the list is 3, and that's actually the AF on button here on the back. And ironically, I have it set to AF on. I can't remember if that's there by default, but I'm going to show you where it is. So I'm going to go ahead and select it. It's in AF4, page 7 of 27. I want that to be AF on. Now this will activate my main focus, which is zone, and AEL will do my secondary focus, and the shutter button now only trips the shutter, only takes a picture, no longer focuses for me. So the next one in the list is number 4, which is actually the C3 button over here on the left. And it's the hardest button in my opinion to get to because I have to actually pull my face away to come over here and get to this. So I put the least important thing on that, and that's displaying my menu. So my menu is a little menu where you can put things, customize maybe settings that are kind of hard to get to in the menu that you want to get to quickly that you haven't set a button to. And so for me, I just press C3, my menu pops up and I can access those things really quickly. You can put whatever you want in my menu, all kinds of stuff. I only have 3 things because I've assigned most of my functions to custom buttons. So let's get back into the menu and customize some more. The next one is number 5, which is the actual garbage can. I have that set to silent shooting. So when you're shooting, if I wanted to get silent shooting on or off, I just press the garbage can. Off would be the mechanical shutter. If I choose on, it's the electronic shutter. And listen how loud it is. Look, I just took 7 pictures. So it makes absolutely no noise in the silent shooting mode. But again, I wouldn't suggest that you actually use that silent shooting mode for anything that's moving really quickly. So let's get back into the menu. Actually, I'm gonna turn that silent shooting off. Boom, just like that. Back to mechanical shutter. So I'm gonna come back into the custom and we're done with page 1. So we're gonna go over to the right to get to page 2. So the very first one in page 2 refers to the actual press of this joystick. And I have that set to my metering mode. So when I'm shooting out in the wild, if I wanted to change metering modes, I press in this joystick and I get the list of all my metering modes. And I can make a quick change to my metering mode, press this to the center button to confirm, and I'm done. Again, it's all a matter of never taking your eye from the viewfinder and just moving your thumb a little teeny bit to access all of this stuff. All right, number 2, I don't have set to anything, which is cool. That gives me an available spot for something down the road, and I'll probably anchor my register custom shoot to that, which would change the entire camera. I can make it go from a fast shutter speed to a slow shutter speed just by holding this button in. I just haven't done that yet. So number 3, I believe, is default. Number 3 refers to the left quadrant of the actual wheel. So that's your white balance. So when you're shooting, if you want to change the white balance, you just press to the left and you have your choices of white balance. And with white balance, you don't actually have to confirm it. You can just choose it and go, and the white balance has been changed. So you can quickly make a change, go back to shoot, and you're good to go. So let's go back in. And the next one is 4, which refers to the white quadrant, or not white, right quadrant of this little wheel here. And that is subject detection. So what does that mean? Let's take a look. So if you're shooting and you press to the right, oh look, you can choose for the IAF between humans and animals. I talked about that earlier. So if I wanted to bounce or toggle from human to animal, it's right there. Put it back there, come back to this little right, go back to animal, I'm on animal, press this, I want humans again, I'm on humans. Really quick. Again, you don't even have to take your eye away from the viewfinder. That's important. So let's go back in. And we'll do one more on this one, which is the bottom quadrant of this wheel, and that is AF tracking sensitivity. We talked about that earlier. If I press down, I can now change the tracking sensitivity from responsive with the wheel to locked on. I tend to shoot this camera on responsive all the time, but if I ever need to make a change, it's right there. I can change it really quick. Again, don't have to take my eye away from the viewfinder. All right, we're almost done customizing this camera. We've only got 2 more pages to go in the custom menu. So I'm gonna go ahead and go to page 3 of 4. And this actually refers to these top 2 buttons on the camera, the C1 button and the C2 button. And if you remember in the beginning or a ways back, we set this C2 button to switch focus areas. Now I'm gonna assign something to the C1 button, and I have set the APS-C full frame select. So what this is now is the C1 button is kind of like a toggle. I can toggle between full frame, which is the full width of the sensor, or crop mode, which will crop out some of the outside and give you a simulated extra reach. So a 600 millimeter lens would be simulated, or equivalent view of a 900 millimeter lens. It's a way to appear like you're getting closer to your target. I use it all the time for images and for video. It's really cool because then you can get really close in on your video. So I'm gonna go ahead and go to the next page, and this page is really got a lot of information here, so you might want to grab a pen and a pencil, or a pen and a paper, pencil, whatever you want to write with. Take some notes on this one because there's a lot of stuff here. And I'm just kidding with you. There's only one selection here, and this selection refers to the button on the barrel of the lens. So on this lens, that actually refers to this button on the barrel, and it's in 3 or 4 places, so you can easily grab it. And what I've assigned to this portion of the customization and on the lens is an automatic focus, manual focus control hold. So what that means is by default, I'm shooting with autofocus. If I reach up here and hold in this button, I'm no longer using autofocus. I'm now in manual focus. So I can use the manual focus wheel on the lens and manual focus. But a couple other things happen at the same time, which is really cool that we've set up. When you're holding manual focus, you're also activating focus peaking. So in the viewfinder and on the rear screen, however you're shooting, you can see exactly where your plane of focus is and what is in focus is highlighted in the color that you've chosen. I've gone one step further though. If you're holding in this manual focus button and you turn the focus ring, it magnifies the entire view like 5.9 times, which turns your camera into a ridiculously powerful spotting scope. And I use it all the time to spot wildlife far away. And people always wonder, hey, how did you know that was that far away? That's how. It's a cool little secret. And I'll demonstrate exactly how to do this a little bit later when we go outside and demonstrate how to use all of this custom functions and features that we've set up on this camera. All right, let's get in here to the more customization options. And you can see there's actually 3 selections for custom key. The top refers to setting up the custom buttons for images. The next one would be setting up a different custom button options for video or recording video. And then underneath that would be setting up a different custom button configuration for playback. We're not going to dive into any of this. And by default, the settings that I've made here for the custom key options for stills will be mirrored with these two. So we're not going to do anything there. This function menu set is default. The My Dial settings is default. This dial setup is interesting. This is where you would want to go if you wanted to move your shutter speed from the back dial to the front, and if you wanted to bounce your aperture from the back to the front. So it allows you to move those dials, because I know some shooters, like Canon shooters, I think it was, the controls are reversed. So this allows you to put them to how you're used to, a more native format. So it's actually a really cool little trick. So I'm gonna go in and we're gonna move to page 10 of 11, the next to last page in the custom operations. And I don't do anything here, this is all default setting. But one interesting thing to note is this movie button. If you're recording video, when you have this set to always, this little teeny button next to the AF on button will always record video no matter what mode you're in. You can be in stills mode and hit this button and start recording video. The other option is movie mode only. If you choose movie mode only, it will only actually record video when you're in one of the set movie modes. I like to leave it as always because there might be some really fast action I want to film when I'm in, say, manual shooting mode for stills. And by doing that, having it set to always, I can just reach up and start recording video immediately without having to switch modes. Actually a really cool little feature. The next one, page 11, the last page of the custom operation. Audio signals I have on because I already talked about I don't use the silent shutter really that much on this camera. So let's go ahead and move to the next section. All of this network stuff is default. I haven't done anything here, so there's 3 pages of that. I'm just gonna breeze right through that. And then we're gonna hit playback, page 1 of 4. I don't do anything here. This is all default settings. On the next page, it's all default settings, but one thing that's kind of interesting to note is this selection, the enlarge initial position, focused position. This is telling the camera that when you review an image and you actually zoom into the image, you're telling the camera you want it to zoom in on the actual focused position of the image. That's pretty cool stuff. So you can see where the camera has focused. So let's go ahead and move to the next one, which is page 3 of 4. Everything here is default except this one down at the bottom, display as group. I have it set to on. So what display as group does is it will group together individual bursts. So say you did a shot, 10 burst shot of an eagle going on and picking up a fish. When you went to review that burst, all 10 images would be clumped together. And I'll show you how to navigate that here next and how you can use this. It's actually a really powerful feature. So you can You can delete the entire group if you want, or you can break it apart and delete individual ones, and I'll go ahead and show you how you navigate within group mode. Here, I'll give you an example of the display as group. So this is a burst of images I took of this limpkin as it came out of the water with a freshwater mussel. You know what? Here's a little funny thing. When they have groups of birds, they give them a name. Like a group of crows is a murder. Do you know what a group of limpkins is called? It's called a hobbling. A hobbling of limpkins. Isn't that just ridiculous? Yeah, I thought so. So anyways, here's the group of images, and you can see that it's a group because you have, it looks like 2 or 3 images sitting on top of each other. So if you wanted to actually navigate within this group, you just press the center button and you've now broken that group, and it tells you on the top right, oh look, 1 of 2. So you just turn the dial to go back to 2. If you wanted to go back to group, you just press the center button, and then you can actually navigate to other images or other series of images. So here's another series of that limpkin. If I wanted to break this group, again, I press the center button, and look, I only did 2 shots. I can see what the second shot is. Let's take a look at this guy. Yeah, he looks pretty good. And that's how the group function works. I think it's really powerful, and it's a feature that I really like. All right, so let's go on to the next section, which will be playback 4 or page 4 of 4. Everything here is default. Display, rotation manual, and image jump setting. I have that all set at default. I haven't made any changes there. So let's go ahead and move over. This is an important one. Monitor brightness. I shoot a lot in sunny weather, so I've gone in and changed this to actually be sunny weather. You have manual, where you can actually change the brightness manually, numerically with different numbers, or you can choose sunny weather. I've chosen sunny weather, but let me give you a little bit of a warning about using sunny weather for the back screen. Sunny weather is not a good indication of the actual exposure of the image, and sunny weather on the rear screen is the colors are a little oversaturated. That's okay for me because I don't mind. I want to be able to see in bright sunny weather on that back screen exactly what I got. Just don't use the rear screen when reviewing your images with the sunny weather setting as an exposure guide because it's not accurate. All right, we've moved on to setup, page 1 of 7. I've already gone over the monitor brightness option. I haven't done anything else to this. This is all default setting, but I would like to note this. Delete, confirm, cancel first. I highly suggest that if you're deleting images in the camera, this will give you one last warning that says, are you sure that you want to delete your image? So it's kind of a fail-safe. I suggest you leave that just how it is. Let's move on to page 2 of 7. Display quality, I have it set at high. I want my display to be high quality display so I can see what's going on. This power save start time, this is an interesting thing here, and it's going to be new to anyone that's coming from, like, say, a DSLR. So with DSLRs in the past, it was okay for the camera to be on at all times because they weren't really consuming much power. With mirrorless cameras, they typically have an EVF on or a rear screen at all times. So they've developed this power save mode. And the way that we've set this one up, if you remember, we're not using any power. So this power save mode isn't really that crucial, but I'll tell you what it does. So I have it set to a 5-minute power save time. So if I don't use this camera within 5 minutes, nothing, not pressing any buttons, it goes to sleep. And when it goes to sleep, it goes into a low power state to where the camera is still on, but it's not instantly ready to take an image. It'll take a minute to wake up. It's kind of like us waking up in the morning. It can be a little bit slow, doesn't have its coffee. So that power set time, you can put it on a longer delay. You can move it to 30 minutes if you want to. I just have mine on 5, and I've developed a habit of every couple minutes of half pressing the shutter button to actually simulate that I'm doing something in the camera so it doesn't fall asleep. All right, the next setting on here is the auto power off temp. I have that at standard, or default setting of standard. Everything else here is default except this touch operation. I have the touch operation set to off, but I'm gonna back up really quick. This cleaning mode is cool. If you ever think there's some dust on the sensor, that's where you would activate cleaning mode, and it does this little shake and tries to clean off the sensor. Actually pretty cool little feature. Back to the touch operation. So I have turned the touch operation of this rear screen to off. I've gone out with a lot of people who've had problems with the touch screen hitting it with their nose. I've done it myself, and when you do that, when you hit it with your nose, it tries to focus on the back of the screen where your nose hit, and it can be kind of a pain in the butt if you're out there shooting. So I've opted to turn that off. You might want to keep it on. That's entirely up to you. All right, let's move to setup 2, page 3 of 7. This is where you would configure some more options for the touch panel. This is all default stuff. So I'm gonna go ahead and move through this. I'm gonna go to page 4 of 7. Again, all default except this USB connection. I've done a firmware update on this camera, and when you do the firmware update, it asks you to put it in mass storage, so that's why that is selected at mass storage. Everything else is default, so I'm gonna move to the next page, page 5 of 7. Everything here is default except, of course, the copyright info. This is where you would want to go in and actually turn on copyright info and set your photographer and copyright name. Mine came preloaded with this weird name, Mark Smith. I don't know what that's. No, of course I'm kidding. That's me. I put that in there. This will embed your name, your copyright date, and all that stuff into the metadata of your images. So this is where you would want to do that if you're going to go ahead and set all that up. Everything else here is default. If you wanted to reformat your card in camera, this is where you would do that. This last setting, record media settings, this is actually pretty important. So if you click this, this is where you prioritize or set priority from card slot 1 to card slot 2. You're basically telling the camera what you want to do with each card slot. There's all kinds of options here. I just have mine set at default. The auto switch media is on. That's kind of important. That's telling the camera that if you fill up card 1 in the middle of a burst, to go ahead and start writing and continuing to card 2. So I would suggest that you keep that just how it is. But again, you can do all kinds of stuff here. You can set JPEGs to one card, RAW to another, duplicates to one, movies to another. You can do all kinds of stuff. So dive in and set it up to best suit your shooting needs. Let's move on to page 6 of 7. Everything here is default. If you want to see what firmware version you have, this is where you would do it under the version. And if you click that, it's going to tell you, and you can see when I did this, it was version 1.10. It might be changed by this time, who knows. Let's go on to page 7. The last page, this is where you would save and load settings from a card. And again, in this, this tutorial, I've got an ebook version of it, and I've actually, in that ebook, if you purchase the ebook, you also get all of my settings and a file that you can instantly load to your camera and have it set up just like mine if that's what you want to do. This is where you would do that. I've already covered that. If you wanted to reset the camera to factory reset, this is where you would do that as well, the setting reset. All right, let's take a look at a really powerful feature that Sony calls My Menu. So they give you the ability to populate a menu of your own, of all of your own settings. That's why it's called My Menu. So the idea behind this would be to take items that might be buried deep within the menu system and put them right up somewhere easy to access in My Menu. I use My Menu. I have 4 items in there. These are 4 items that I haven't assigned to any buttons. Most things I want to get to really quickly, I'll assign to a button, but these, I might use them not that frequently, but I still want to get to them every once in a while. So let me show you what I have in My Menu and explain why I've made these choices. So the very first thing is a AF tracking sensitivity, and I explained earlier in this video how important that was, that I thought 5 made this camera more responsive, and it was needed, at least in my experience, to help me capture really high percentage of sharp images. I have yet to change it from 5 to anything slower, but I have it here now in My Menu in case I feel that I need to down the road. This next one, this MF Assist on. When you're using this camera in the way that we have it set up, we're going to be setting it up with a feature where you can touch the barrel of the lens, the button on there, activate manual focus, and then it magnifies the entire screen and makes the camera a spotting scope. There might be times when you don't actually want it to do that. So that's what this MF Assist is. If I come in here in My Menu and I turn it off, it'll no longer magnify the screen when I adjust the focus wheel on the lens. And there's times when I don't want it to do that. So that's why it's right here in My Menu. I'll go ahead and put it back on. Monitor brightness. There are times when I'm shooting outside and my preferred sunny weather setting, maybe I'm shooting at night. If you put it on sunny weather at night and you turn this camera on, it's like a beacon of spotlight. It's almost blinding. So there are times when I'll come in here and I'll change this back to a lower setting. And then that creative style of vivid. If I'm going to go shoot video, I'm going to come in here and make changes to this. Might even change it to a more of a standard format and turn some of the sharpening down for when I'm shooting video. that's why I have that really accessible in the My Menu, and that's why I have those 4 items. I'll probably add more there. I suggest you spend some time with the camera, find some features that you like that might be buried deep in the menu system, put them right here in My Menu, and then you can get to them really quickly anytime you want. One of the cool features about the way that we've set this up, when I programmed that button on the barrel of the lens to be manual focus, it also transforms the camera into like a really powerful spotting scope. And I'm lucky enough to have a red shoulder hawk just sitting over here on a power line, just so I can demonstrate that feature to you. So let me show you how it works. All right, so I got the bird in the center of my viewfinder. I've already acquired focus. I'm gonna reach up and press the button on the barrel of the lens. That's gonna activate manual focus. Oh, that was nice. And the bird just went to the bathroom. But I've got manual focus is activated, so you see the bird is highlighted in blue. That's focus peaking. And if I barely turn the actual focus ring on the lens, it activates a magnification of 5.9. Doesn't take an image like this, but it allows you to actually look at things far, far away. So look at, God, that bird is gorgeous. Oh my goodness, it's looking right at us. How cool is that? Okay, it actually allows you, oh, sorry, I'm getting easily distracted by this beautiful bird. It allows you to see things that are really far away. So it turns your camera into a really good spotting scope. Let's take one more look at this beauty. Look at that, and wow, gorgeous. Yep, cool feature, man. All right, so I'm gonna give you a quick demonstration on how to actually use the camera the way we have it set up, using these different focus areas on the different buttons. And I still have this hawk up here on the wire. And if you look here on the back, the bird's not in focus. So I'm gonna use zone, and I'm gonna use this AF on button. I'm gonna hold it in. And as long as I'm holding it in, it's trying to focus on this bird. Those little green squares are focus indicators saying that's where the focus is. And if I move around, it keeps the focus on the bird. It's amazing, beautiful, good stuff. But if I wanted a smaller focus area, I just move my thumb over to the right and I press that, and it activates the registered focus area that we activated on the AEL button. So now I've got 2 at the touch of a finger. If I wanted a third, I press the C2 button, and I have this little tiny one up here that I can move all around the screen if I want. And say I wanted to compose this shot like this, and I hold the AF on button, got my focus, I can fire away, boom, take a couple shots. Say I wanted to go back to zone really quickly, I can just press the C2 button again a couple times, and I'm back on zone right where I started. So I've got zone here. I want a smaller one, I move over a little bit to the AEL button, it activates the middle. If I wanted the tiny one, I press C2 and I get this tiny one, and I have to cycle back through pressing C2 again to get back to zone. Really powerful stuff. And it looks like this bird is looking for a late afternoon snack. So I'm gonna hang out and see if maybe it gets something cool. And if it does, I'll share it in the video. So congratulations, you made it to the end of my A7R4 setup guide. And now you have all of that great information right at your fingertips. Or actually, you probably don't have it right at your fingertips. If you buy the digital ebook version of this video, then you can have it at your fingertips. There's a link to that in the description below, and it's a way that you can help support me and what I do, the entire content of the video, and a downloadable PDF that you can take anywhere with you. Pretty cool stuff. So now it's up to you to take all of that power, have it at your fingertips, and go out and capture some incredible images with this camera, because that's what I'm gonna do. I know there's some Osprey down the road from my house that are just waiting for a photo shoot. I'm gonna go capture some incredible images of them with this camera, and of course the impressive Sony 600 f4. I'll see you later.